In the rugged north of the Greek world, a new power was stirring. The Kingdom of Macedon, long considered a backwater by its southern neighbors, was being forged into a formidable force. At its head was a king of boundless ambition and brutal cunning, Philip II. We see him on the training fields, drilling his soldiers in a revolutionary new formation, the Macedonian Phalanx, a bristling wall of sarissas destined to dominate the battlefields of its age. By his side ruled a queen of equal ambition and even greater mystique, Olympias of Epirus. A devout follower of ancient ecstatic cults, she was a figure of both awe and fear. In the torchlit shadows of the palace, she performed sacred rites with her tamed serpents, whispering that her son's true father was no mortal king. She claimed she had been visited by Zeus himself, the king of the gods, who had sired the child she now carried. On a stormy summer night in 356 BC, the heavens themselves seemed to hold their breath. Over the Macedonian capital of Pella, a tempest brewed. Yet through the churning clouds, a single star blazed with an unnatural intensity. As Olympias's labor began, a brilliant meteor seared a path across the sky, a fiery arrow that seemed to plunge from the heavens directly toward the royal palace, marking the exact moment of birth. This night was not just a maelstrom of celestial drama, it was a nexus where history and legend became one. On this very day, 3 other auspicious events unfolded. King Philip's prized racehorse galloped to victory at the prestigious Olympic Games. His most trusted general, Parmenion, secured a decisive victory against the Illyrians. And far away, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the magnificent temple of Artemis at Ephesus, was consumed by a mysterious fire. Later chroniclers like Plutarch would offer a poetic explanation. The goddess Artemis was too preoccupied, they said, too busy attending the birth of a future conqueror to save her own sacred temple. The confluence of these events was read as an undeniable sign. As the first light of dawn broke over Pella, illuminating the face of the newborn prince cradled in his mother's arms, the omens had spoken. A child was born, and the world did not yet know that its destiny had been forever changed. In the sprawling city of Ephesus stood a monument to faith and human ingenuity, the Temple of Artemis. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, its colossal marble form dominated the skyline. More than just a place of worship, it was the vibrant heart of the city, a nexus of commerce, art, and devotion, its halls lined with breathtaking sculptures and treasures from across the known world. But lurking in the shadows of this great city was a man named Herostratus. He was no great warrior, nor a powerful king. He was an ordinary man, driven by an extraordinary and dark ambition. His soul was consumed by a single obsessive desire, to etch his name into the annals of history, to be remembered for all time, no matter the cost. His gaze was fixed on the temple, not with reverence but with a chilling purpose. On the night of July 21, 356 BC, under the cloak of darkness, Herostratus put his ghastly plan into motion. He slipped into the hallowed sanctuary and set a torch to the massive cedarwood roof beams. The flames licked at the dry timber, erupting into a furious blaze that devoured sacred tapestries and priceless offerings. The fire grew into a monstrous inferno, its hellish glow turning the night sky of Ephesus into a terrifying false dawn. The citizens of Ephesus poured from their homes, their faces masks of horror and disbelief, as they watched their most sacred site become a funeral pyre. The immense marble columns, which had stood for generations, cracked and groaned under the unbearable heat. With a deafening roar, the magnificent roof collapsed in a cascade of fire and embers, sealing the temple's fate and breaking the city's heart. As dawn broke, only a blackened skeleton of the wonder remained. Herostratus was quickly captured. Under torture, he confessed his sole motive, to achieve immortal fame. The Ephesians, appalled by his vanity, executed him and enacted a law to erase his name from history, punishing any who spoke it with death. Yet the law failed. His name survives precisely because of the attempt to silence it. It is said that on the same night the temple burned, a boy named Alexander was born in Macedon. The goddess Artemis, they whispered, was too busy attending his birth to save her own temple. While history remembers the son, it was the father, King Philip II, who forged the instrument of conquest. We see him not in a palace, but on the sun-scorched training grounds of Macedon. He is a king clad in sweat and dust, personally hammering a nation of shepherds into the most lethal army the world had yet seen. This was his vision, a kingdom built not on diplomacy but on cold, hard steel. The heart of this new war machine was the Macedonian Phalanx. Forget the shorter spears of the Greeks. Philip's men wielded the sarissa, a monstrous pike over 18 feet long. We see them training, a moving forest of spear points, a wall of bronze and muscle advancing with terrifying discipline. Each soldier was a single part of an unstoppable whole, a testament to Philip's revolutionary military mind. At the edge of this field of steel, a small boy stood watch. It was the young prince Alexander. While other children played, he observed the drills for hours on end, his eyes tracking every maneuver, every shouted command. He was not just watching, he was studying, absorbing the rhythm of war as the sun gleamed off the soldiers' intricate armor. Occasionally, King Philip would stride over to his son. Pointing a calloused finger, he would explain the principles of leverage that made the sarissa so deadly, or the importance of combined arms where cavalry and infantry worked in perfect sync. This was not a lecture from a scroll. It was a king's practical education in the brutal art of power. While other princes were tutored in philosophy and poetry, Alexander's first classroom was the military camp. He learned logistics from the groaning wheels of supply carts, strategy from his father's relentless drills, and leadership from the unwavering loyalty a true soldier king commanded. It was on these dusty fields that the instincts of a conqueror were born, long before he ever led an army of his own. This early immersion in the mechanics of warfare laid the foundation for an empire that would one day stretch to the very edges of the known world. History is not just a sequence of grand battles and political treaties. It is also woven from moments of profound insight and personal courage, moments that reveal the character of those who would go on to shape the world. One such story is not of a conquest, but of a connection, a tale of a young prince and a wild stallion that would become legendary. In the court of King Philip II of Macedon, a magnificent black stallion named Bucephalus was presented. He was a creature of immense power and beauty, but possessed a spirit so fierce that he could not be ridden. One by one, Philip's most seasoned generals and horsemen tried to mount the beast, only to be thrown back by its violent rearing and kicking. It seemed an impossible task, a force of nature that refused to be mastered by man. Frustrated, King Philip ordered the untamable horse to be led away. But as the grooms struggled with the defiant animal, a young voice cut through the murmurs of the court. It was Philip's son, Alexander, who boldly declared it a shame that such a fine horse should be lost for lack of understanding. He claimed he could succeed where the veterans had failed. The court erupted in laughter at the boy's audacity. Undeterred, Alexander proposed a wager to his skeptical father. If he could not tame the horse, he would pay its considerable price himself. Amused by his son's confidence, Philip agreed. Alexander stepped calmly into the arena. He had observed what the experienced men had missed. The great horse was not merely wild, but terrified of its own dancing shadow on the ground. Approaching Bucephalus, he spoke in a soft, steady voice and gently turned the horse's head to face the sun. With its frightening shadow now cast behind it, the stallion's panic instantly subsided. In that moment of quiet understanding, Alexander swung himself onto the horse's back. He rode Bucephalus around the arena, demonstrating perfect control, to the astonishment of all who watched. As the young prince dismounted, his father, his eyes filled with tears of pride, embraced him. "O my son," Philip declared, "look thee out a kingdom equal to and worthy of thyself, for Macedonia is too little for thee." This was the beginning of a partnership that would carry them across the known world, a testament to the idea that true mastery is found not in force, but in empathy. In the annals of history, few relationships have been as consequential as that between a teacher and his student. Having forged a powerful kingdom from the strife-ridden lands of Macedonia, King Philip II recognized that the future of his empire rested not just on the strength of its armies, but on the mind of its future king. To shape that mind, he summoned the most brilliant intellect of the age, the philosopher Aristotle, to become the royal tutor to his young son Alexander. Far from the noise and political machinations of the capital at Pella, Philip established a unique school at the serene temple of the nymphs in Mieza. Amidst shaded groves, tranquil gardens, and ancient stone colonnades, this idyllic sanctuary provided the perfect setting for a revolutionary education. Here the mind of the future conqueror would be molded, shielded from the corrupting influences of courtly life. In these hallowed gardens, a remarkable scene unfolded daily. 13-year-old Alexander, alongside the sons of Macedonian nobles who would one day become his most trusted generals, gathered at the feet of their master. Aristotle, holding a weathered scroll, did not simply lecture. He ignited their curiosity, engaging them in profound dialogues about philosophy, politics, ethics, and the natural world. He was teaching them not what to think, but how to think. Aristotle expertly cultivated Alexander's innate passion for the heroic epics, particularly Homer's Iliad. He presented the young prince with a personal annotated copy of the text, which Alexander would treasure for the rest of his life. As Aristotle recounted the legendary deeds of Achilles, he instilled in his student the concept of arete, the Greek ideal of excellence and moral virtue. A true leader, he taught, must be more than a warrior. He must be a paragon of greatness. This was no mere tutoring, it was the forging of a king. Aristotle's lessons imparted to Alexander a lifelong thirst for knowledge, a profound respect for Greek culture, and an unquenchable ambition to surpass the heroes of legend. The philosopher was not just educating a prince, he was giving a future conqueror the intellectual and moral framework for the world he would one day create. This unique education laid the foundation for a legacy that would echo through eternity. In the annals of history, few names resonate with the thunder of conquest and the brilliance of command like Alexander the Great. Yet before he was a legend, he was a boy, and it was in his youth that the first sparks of his greatness ignited a flame that would one day engulf the known world. In 340 BC, as King Philip II of Macedon led his seasoned army to lay siege to Byzantium, he entrusted his kingdom to an unlikely regent, his 16-year-old son, Alexander. In the grand hall of the palace at Pella, the young prince sat upon the throne, a boy tasked with a man's burden. When a delegation of Persian ambassadors arrived, they expected a naive teenager, easily swayed by tales of splendor. They were met with a mind as sharp as a spear tip. Instead of inquiring about the Persian king's riches or the fabled hanging gardens, Alexander's questions were those of a seasoned strategist. He grilled the envoys on the length of their roads, the logistics of their supply lines, and the fighting prowess of their infantry. The Persians, stunned, could only exchange bewildered glances. This was not a boy. This was a future king assessing his future enemy. Alexander's first true test came swiftly. Believing a mere boy held the reins of power, the Thracian tribe of the Maidi rebelled against Macedonian authority. It was a calculated challenge, designed to fracture the kingdom while its king was away. But Alexander did not waver. He did not wait for his father's return. With decisive authority that belied his age, he mustered an army and marched north. The Maidi rebellion was crushed with astonishing speed and ferocity. To cement his victory, he drove out the tribe and established a new city in its place, naming it Alexandropolis, the first of many to bear his name. He had faced his first crisis not as a regent, but as a commander. Thus, long before he crossed the Hellespont or rode into Babylon, the world had its first glimpse of the man who would become Alexander the Great. It was a warning written in the fire of his first command that a new and terrible force was rising in Macedonia. The year is 338 BC. On the plains of Chaeronea, the combined might of Athens and Thebes stands poised for a fateful confrontation. They have united to defend the liberty of the Greek city-states against the encroaching shadow of Macedon. The future of Greece itself hangs in the balance, ready to be decided by the clash of spear and shield. Commanding the formidable Macedonian army is King Philip II, a master of strategy. Yet for the battle's most critical task, he looks not to his seasoned generals but to his own blood. He entrusts the elite companion cavalry and the decisive left wing to his 18-year-old son, Alexander. This is the ultimate test of a youth forged by Aristotle's wisdom and relentless military training. As the battle commences, Philip initiates a brilliant and daring gambit, a feigned retreat. His disciplined infantry slowly pulls back, deliberately goading the overconfident Athenians to surge forward. The disciplined withdrawal works perfectly, stretching the Greek phalanx and creating a fatal, inviting gap in their battle line. The trap is now set. Seizing the perfect fleeting moment, Alexander gives the signal. The ground trembles as he leads 1,800 horsemen of the companion cavalry in a thunderous charge. Dust and chaos erupt as they pivot and slam into the exposed Greek flank, aiming directly for their most revered warriors, the legendary and undefeated Theban sacred band. The impact of the charge is devastating and absolute. Alexander's cavalry encircles the elite Theban unit, which, true to its honor, refuses to yield or retreat. They fight with breathtaking courage to the very last man. With their anchor shattered and their morale broken, the entire Greek line collapses into chaos. The battle transforms into a rout. Macedonia stands victorious. Alexander, given his first great command, had delivered one of history's most decisive victories. In the year 336 BC, the city of Aegae, the ancient capital of Macedon, was alive with celebration. Banners flew high as the kingdom commemorated a grand wedding, that of King Philip II's daughter, Cleopatra, to Alexander III of Epirus. Amidst the joyous procession, the bride radiated happiness, a symbol of the powerful alliances her father had forged. Watching from the sidelines was the heir Alexander, his expression a mixture of pride and deep contemplation, perhaps sensing the momentous shifts on the horizon. This day was meant to be the pinnacle of his father's reign, a testament to a united Greece under Macedonian leadership. At the height of the festivities, Philip II made his grand entrance into the city's theatre. Striding confidently without his customary bodyguards, he presented himself not just as a king, but as a near-divine figure, a leader whose power was absolute and unchallenged. The assembled Greek dignitaries watched with a mixture of awe and fear. Philip's display was a clear message. He was the master of their world, the unifier and commander of the Hellenic League, poised to lead them in a great war against the Persian Empire. His power seemed unassailable, his future glorious. But in an instant, triumph turned to tragedy. From the crowd emerged one of Philip's own bodyguards, Pausanias of Orestis. With grim determination etched on his face, he drew a dagger and lunged at the unprotected king. The blade found its mark, and a gasp of shock rippled through the theatre as Philip II, the great conqueror and diplomat, fell to the ground. Chaos erupted, the cheers of celebration turning into screams of horror and confusion as the architect of Macedonian supremacy lay dying. In the ensuing panic, Pausanias attempted a desperate escape, but was swiftly cut down by other guards. As the dust settled, all eyes turned to the young Alexander. His initial shock gave way to a steely resolve, a look that spoke of both grief and destiny. In that moment of crisis, the Macedonian army, the heart of the kingdom's power, wasted no time. They raised their spears and shields, acclaiming the 20-year-old prince as their new king. The assassination of Philip II had closed one chapter of history, but it had just opened another. The epic age of Alexander the Great. The year is 336 BC, and the Grand Theatre at Aegae, the ancient capital of Macedon, is electric with anticipation. A vast crowd roars its approval as their king, Philip II, enters for the wedding celebration of his daughter. Basking in the adulation, Philip, in a show of confidence and connection to his subjects, waves his 7 bodyguards away. Among them is his own son, a young man named Alexander. The king, robed in white and godlike in his splendor, walks alone, a symbol of his supposed invincibility and the unity of his kingdom. Amid the festive throng, one man moves with a purpose far darker than celebration. He is Pausanias of Orestis, a former member of Philip's own royal bodyguard. The camera tracks him as he navigates the cheering spectators, his hand ominously hidden beneath his cloak. A close-up reveals a face etched with a grim cocktail of vengeance and resolve, a stark, silent contrast to the joyous symphony of the theatre. His eyes are fixed on the approaching king, every step a countdown to a moment that will shatter an empire. The moment arrives with shocking speed. As Philip passes through a narrow entryway, Pausanias lunges from the crowd. Time seems to stretch and warp in a dramatic slow-motion sequence. From under his garments, Pausanias draws a long Celtic dagger, its blade glinting in the morning sun. With a final desperate surge, he plunges the weapon deep between King Philip's ribs. A collective gasp sucks the air from the theatre, and a stunned silence descends upon the once cheering crowd. The king stumbles and collapses, his white robes instantly stained crimson. The silence breaks and chaos erupts. As panic grips the audience, Pausanias makes a desperate dash for freedom, sprinting towards getaway horses waiting nearby. But the king's bodyguards, their initial shock turning to fury, give chase. They catch him before he can escape, spearing him to death on the spot. Through the pandemonium, the focus shifts to Alexander. His face, a mask of initial horror, hardens into one of cold, steely determination. The soldiers, his father's loyal men, surround him, their cries of "Long live the king!" echoing through the theatre, anointing him as Alexander the Great. In the autumn of 336 BC, within the grand theatre of Aegae, a shadow fell over the heart of Macedon. The lifeless body of King Philip II, the unifier of Greece, was carried away amidst the stunned silence of his court. The air, thick with the scent of celebration, turned to tragedy, now crackled with uncertainty and naked ambition. In the eyes of the nobles and generals who watched, shock quickly gave way to calculation, as the throne of Macedon lay suddenly, violently vacant. Amidst the swirling chaos, one figure stood resolute. The young prince Alexander, his hand resting firmly on the hilt of his sword, became the anchor in the storm. It was the veteran general Antipater, a loyal servant to the fallen king who broke the spell of confusion. He stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority, and presented the 20-year-old Alexander to the assembly of the Macedonian army, the true arbiters of royal succession. Ascending a stone platform, Alexander's sharp gaze swept across the sea of grizzled veterans and hardened soldiers. He stood tall, a beacon of strength and unwavering resolve, his lineage and bearing projecting an aura of command that belied his youth. A single rhythmic clang broke the silence as a soldier struck his sarissa against his bronze shield. Another joined, then 100, then 1,000, until the entire theatre thundered with a deafening, unified beat. The sound coalesced into a single roaring chant, "Alexander!" The acclamation was absolute. A close-up on Alexander's face reveals not triumph, but a solemn acceptance of his destiny, sealed with a resolute nod. As the echoes of his name faded, the newly proclaimed King of Macedon turned his gaze towards the distant horizon. This was not just the dawn of a new reign, it was the dawn of an entirely new era, one that would see the name of Alexander the Great carved into history itself. In the year 335 BC, a young Alexander, recently ascended to the throne of Macedon, was confronted with his inaugural great challenge. Before he could direct his ambitions toward the vast Persian Empire, he first had to pacify his northern borders, where the restless tribes of the Balkans stirred with defiance. His campaign began in the Haemus Mountains. Here the Thracians had fortified the high ground, believing their position unassailable. But Alexander, ever the strategist, turned their defenses into a weakness. He ordered his men to push their own supply wagons down the steep pass, which crashed into the Thracian lines, sowing chaos and clearing a path for the Macedonian advance. Alexander then marched his army north to the formidable Danube River, where the Getae tribe awaited him. In a display of audacious speed, he had his forces construct makeshift rafts and cross the entire river under the cover of a single night. Stunned by this impossible feat, the Getae army broke and fled before a major battle could even begin, abandoning their town to the Macedonians. However, as one threat was neutralized, a new one ignited. A messenger arrived with urgent news. King Clitus of Illyria and his ally King Glaucias of the Taulanti were in open revolt. Without hesitation, Alexander wheeled his veteran army around, force-marching them with incredible speed toward the fortress of Pelium to confront this new rebellion. At Pelium, through a combination of strategic genius and the sheer relentless determination of his army, Alexander decisively crushed the Illyrian uprising. He had successfully pacified his entire northern frontier. The Balkan campaign was a resounding success, a brutal and swift testament to the young king's military might. Now the stage was set, and the world awaited his next move. While Alexander secured his northern borders, a dangerous rumor spread across Greece. The young king was dead. Emboldened, the proud city of Thebes rose in open revolt, expelling the Macedonian garrison, an act of defiance they would come to regret. But Alexander was very much alive. Upon hearing of the rebellion, he moved with a speed that defied belief, marching his army 240 miles in just 13 days. He appeared before the walls of Thebes before the city even knew he was coming. Stunned by his sudden arrival, the Thebans were given one last chance to surrender. Alexander, willing to avoid bloodshed, offered mercy. But filled with misplaced courage, Thebes refused. Their fate was sealed. The assault was swift and merciless. The Macedonians, joined by other Greek allies who held old grudges against Thebes, overwhelmed the city's defenses. What followed was not a battle, but a slaughter. By order of the League of Corinth, Thebes was razed to the ground. Its territory was divided, and its 30,000 citizens were sold into slavery. Only the house of the poet Pindar was spared. The message to the rest of Greece was clear and terrifying. This was the price of rebellion. Alexander's authority was now absolute. With Greece finally secure behind him, Alexander the Great, just 22 years old, was ready to embark on the great adventure his father had planned. In 334 BC, he set in motion the invasion of the Persian Empire, a campaign that would reshape the ancient world. This was more than a military campaign. For Alexander, it was a journey into legend. He saw himself as the new Achilles. Upon reaching Asia, his first stop was Troy, where he paid homage to the heroes of the Iliad, anointing himself with their legacy and preparing for his own epic. As his fleet cut through the waters, the coast of Asia Minor drew near. This was the domain of Darius III, the king of Persia. But Alexander was determined to make a statement before the first battle was even fought. In a powerful symbolic act, Alexander threw his spear from the ship, planting it in the soil of Asia. He was the first to leap ashore, fully armed, proclaiming that he accepted this continent from the gods as spear-won territory. The message was clear to all, friend and foe alike. Alexander had not come to negotiate or raid. He had come to conquer. This single defiant act was the true beginning of his war against Persia, a challenge thrown at the feet of the most powerful empire on earth.
May 334 BC. Merely weeks after landing in Asia, Alexander's army faced its first true test. The Persian satraps, ignoring warnings to avoid a direct confrontation, gathered their forces at the Granicus River, believing the terrain gave them an unbreakable advantage. Their cavalry lined the high, steep eastern bank, a formidable wall against any attacker. Alexander's most trusted general, Parmenion, urged him to wait and cross under the cover of dawn. Alexander refused, famously stating the river would be no more difficult to cross in the morning. He decided to attack at once, leading the charge himself. At the head of the elite companion cavalry, he plunged his warhorse, Bucephalus, down the muddy bank and into the river, driving his men up the treacherous slope toward the enemy. The fighting was a desperate, chaotic struggle in the mud and water. Alexander, his plumed helmet making him an easy target, became a magnet for enemy leaders. He engaged and killed the satrap Rusaces, but the effort shattered his lance. At that moment of vulnerability, another satrap, Spithridates, closed in from behind, raising his sword to strike the king down. But he was not alone. In a split second, Clitus the Black, one of his most loyal officers, spurred his horse forward and with a single blow, severed Spithridates' arm, saving the king from certain death. It was a pivotal moment in the battle and in history. The rescue ensured Alexander's survival and turned the tide of the engagement. The death of their commanders shattered the Persian morale. Their line collapsed into a full-scale rout, with the cavalry fleeing in panic. Alexander's first major victory in Asia was a stunning success, won by his own audacity and the unwavering loyalty of men like Clitus the Black, who ensured the great conqueror lived to fight another day.
In the winter of 333 BC, as Alexander the Great and his army rested in the Phrygian capital of Gordium, they encountered a challenge not of military might, but of legend. In the citadel stood an ancient ox cart, tied with a knot that had baffled all who had attempted to unravel it. The year 333 BC is displayed on screen, and visuals show Alexander's army marching into the ancient city of Gordium, with focus shifting to the weathered ox cart. This was the Gordian knot. According to an ancient prophecy, the man who could untie this incredibly complex knot was destined to become the ruler of all Asia. For generations, kings and commoners alike had tried and failed, their fingers finding no purchase, no beginning and no end. Close-up shots reveal the intricate knot, made of tough cornel bark, its ends hidden within a seemingly impossible tangle. Intrigued by the legend, Alexander stepped forward to examine the knot himself. He wrestled with it for a time, searching for a conventional solution, but the knot held fast, its ancient secret locked away. His followers watched, wondering if even their king could be defeated by a simple rope. Visuals show Alexander studying the knot intently, His generals and soldiers gathered around him in tense silence. But Alexander was not a conventional man. Frustrated, he declared, "It makes no difference how they are loosed." In a moment that would become legend, he abandoned the puzzle and created his own solution. He drew his sword and with a single mighty stroke cut the knot in half. A dramatic slow-motion shot captures the gleam of his blade as it slices cleanly through the center of the Gordian knot. The knot was undone. That night, a great thunderstorm broke out, which Alexander and his seers took as a sign of the gods' approval. He had not solved the puzzle, he had shattered it. The prophecy was fulfilled, not by cleverness but by bold, decisive action, the very quality that would allow him to conquer an empire. The scene ends with the severed knot falling to the ground as the crowd erupts in cheers, followed by a powerful thunderstorm with lightning flashing across the sky. November 333 BC. At Issus, two of the ancient world's greatest armies stood arrayed for battle. The Persian king, Darius III, had personally marched to crush the young Macedonian invader, confident that his vastly superior numbers would ensure victory. Darius had chosen the battlefield, hoping the narrow terrain would funnel the Macedonians into a killing zone. As the battle was joined, the sheer weight of the Persian army began to press hard against Alexander's left wing, threatening to break it. But Alexander was not fighting a conventional battle. He was hunting a king. Seeing a weakness in the Persian guard, he ignored the struggle on the flank and led a decisive all-or-nothing charge straight for Darius himself. It was a spear tip aimed at the heart of the Persian command. The fighting around the king's chariot was savage. Alexander fought with a fury, desperate to reach his royal rival. For Darius, the sight of Alexander carving a path directly towards him was too much. His nerve broke. He turned his chariot and fled for his life, abandoning his army, his honor, and his family. A king's courage is the heart of his army. When Darius fled, that heart was torn out. The Persian line disintegrated into a mad scramble for survival. The Battle of Issus was a total victory for Alexander. A triumph not just of arms, but of will. The Persian Empire would never recover. In 332 BC, after his great victories, Alexander marched down the Phoenician coast. City after city surrendered, but one refused: Tyre. An island fortress, rich and powerful, its people were confident their mighty walls and supreme navy made them invincible. They denied Alexander entry. To assault an island, Alexander needed a fleet, but his was small and scattered. Faced with this impossible challenge, he devised one of the most ambitious engineering projects in history. If his army could not sail to Tyre, he would make the land walk there. He would build a causeway. The siege became a 7-month ordeal of relentless toil. The Tyrians fought back fiercely, launching raids from the sea to harass the builders. Storms battered the construction, and the water grew deeper, slowing progress. But Alexander's will was absolute. What was destroyed was rebuilt, stronger than before. To protect his men, Alexander ordered the construction of colossal mobile siege towers on the causeway itself. These wooden giants, armed with artillery, acted as shields and firing platforms, dueling with the Tyrian navy while the mole crept ever closer to the island's walls. Finally, the land bridge was complete. Alexander's war machines, which had been useless from the mainland, could now be brought to bear directly against the walls. The impregnable city was breached and fell in a brutal assault. The fall of Tyre was a terrifying testament to an army that could bend even the sea to its will. After conquering Tyre, Alexander's path to Egypt seemed clear. Only one fortress held out, Gaza. Its commander, a loyal eunuch named Batis, had refused to surrender, trusting in the city's high walls and his garrison of Arab mercenaries. Gaza presented a unique challenge. The city was built on such a high mound that Alexander's siege engines were useless. Unwilling to be delayed, Alexander commanded his men to build a colossal ramp of earth and sand, a man-made hill to rival the one Gaza sat upon, so they could bring their towers to the walls. As the siege mounds rose, Alexander grew impatient. He personally led an assault to capture a section of the wall. Fighting in the front ranks as always, he became a clear target. A heavy catapult bolt fired from the walls punched through his shield and armor, sinking deep into his shoulder. The wound was severe. The king was carried back to camp, where his surgeon, Philip, faced the grim task of removing the bolt. It was said the projectile was so large and the wound so deep that the surgeon had to cut into the king's flesh to extract it, a procedure that nearly killed him. Alexander survived. His brush with death only fueled the fury of his army. When the ramps were finally completed, the Macedonians stormed Gaza with a vengeance and the city fell. Alexander had paid in blood, but the road to Egypt was now open. In 331 BC, after being hailed as Pharaoh of Egypt and declared the son of Zeus Ammon by the oracle at Siwa, Alexander sought to create a lasting legacy. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a founder of civilizations, and he envisioned a magnificent new capital for his Egyptian territory. He chose a specific strip of land, a strategic position with a natural harbor sheltered by the island of Pharos and access to the Nile's trade routes via the lake. It was the perfect location for a city that would connect Greece to the riches of Egypt. When it came time to mark out the foundations for this new metropolis, the architects realized they had no chalk. Unfazed, Alexander improvised. He took the barley flour that his soldiers carried for their meals and began to trace the grand boulevards and the central marketplace, designing a city grid of unparalleled scale. No sooner had he laid out the city's plan than an omen appeared. Great flocks of birds descended and devoured the flour. While his men were troubled, Alexander's seers declared it a sign of great fortune. This new city, Alexandria, would grow so prosperous that it would produce enough to nourish nations all over the world. And so, from a line of flour on a deserted coast, the foundation was laid for what would become the greatest city of the Hellenistic world. Alexandria would be a beacon of culture, commerce, and knowledge for centuries, its library and lighthouse wonders of the ancient world, Alexander's most enduring legacy. In early 331 BC, having secured Egypt, Alexander the Great embarked on a personal and perilous pilgrimage. He turned his back on the fertile Nile and led his men deep into the hostile Libyan desert, seeking the remote and legendary oracle of Zeus Ammon at the Siwa oasis. The journey was an epic in itself. Ancient sources claim that when the expedition lost its way and was on the verge of dying from thirst, they were saved first by a sudden rainstorm and then guided for the remainder of the way by two divine crows. After weeks of hardship, the sight of the oasis was a miracle. Here in this isolated paradise stood the temple, a site of immense spiritual significance where the Egyptian god Amun was identified by the Greeks with their own king of the gods, Zeus. The high priest welcomed Alexander, reputedly greeting him as the son of the god. Then, in an unprecedented move, Alexander was permitted to enter the holiest part of the temple, a place forbidden to all others. He walked into the darkness alone to consult the oracle directly. No one knows for certain what questions Alexander asked, or what answers he received in that secret chamber. He told his followers only that he had heard what his heart desired. From that day forward, Alexander's belief in his own divine destiny was absolute. The visit cemented his status as a god-king, a son of Zeus Ammon, forever altering how he saw himself and his place in the world. In 331 BC, on a wide plain at Gaugamela, the fate of empires was to be decided. King Darius III of Persia had gathered a colossal army from every corner of his domain, confident his sheer numbers would crush the invaders. Facing him was Alexander the Great, with a smaller but battle-hardened Macedonian force. The stakes could not be higher. Darius unleashed his shock troops. Cycled chariots churned the earth, but it was the war elephants that were meant to smash the heart of Alexander's army. 15 massive beasts, trumpeting in fury, charged directly at the dense wall of spears that was the Macedonian Phalanx. But Alexander had prepared his men for this. This was not a wall to be broken, but a trap to be sprung. On command, the Phalanx opened its ranks, creating channels of open ground. The elephants, trained to charge at a solid mass, instinctively funneled into these corridors. Trapped between the lines of men, the great beasts were attacked from all sides by soldiers, using their long sarissas to wound their legs and torment their handlers. The terrifying charge was neutralized. The elephants panicked, becoming as dangerous to the Persians as they were to the Greeks. Seeing his ultimate weapon fail, and with Alexander's elite cavalry now striking at his center, Darius III lost his nerve and fled the field. His flight shattered the Persian morale, turning the battle into a decisive victory for Alexander. Gaugamela was the battle that broke the power of the Persian Empire forever. Before Alexander could reach Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire, he had to face one final desperate defense. At a narrow pass known as the Persian Gate, the satrap Ariobarzanes and his small force held back the entire Macedonian army for a month in a heroic last stand. But the path was cleared, and Alexander arrived at the richest city under the sun. Persepolis was not a fortress, but a symbol of Achaemenid power and majesty. As he passed through the Gate of All Nations, he entered a treasure house filled with the accumulated wealth of 2 centuries of empire. Alexander declared the city's treasures forfeit and gave it over to his men to sack, as a punishment for the Persian invasion of Greece generations earlier. The loot was so immense, it was said that 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels were needed to carry it all away. The end of Persepolis came in fire. During a drunken victory banquet, the Athenian courtesan Thais supposedly gave a speech, urging Alexander to burn the palace of Xerxes as retribution for the burning of Athens. In a fateful decision, Alexander agreed and led the way in setting fire to the magnificent structure, reducing the jewel of the Persian Empire to ruins. After the catastrophic defeat at Gaugamela, Darius III, the great king of Persia, was no longer a monarch but a fugitive. His authority had crumbled, and he was forced to flee eastward, relentlessly pursued by Alexander the Great. But the greatest threat to Darius came not from Alexander, but from his own commanders. Led by the ambitious satrap Bessus, his retinue betrayed him. They took Darius captive, hoping to either hand him over to Alexander to win favor, or use him as a rallying point if they could escape. Alexander, hearing of the betrayal, was furious. He launched a desperate, high-speed pursuit, covering immense distances with a handful of his best men. He was not just chasing an enemy, but racing to save a fellow king from a dishonorable fate. As Alexander's vanguard closed in, Bessus and his men saw their plans unravel. In a final act of treachery, they mortally wounded Darius and left him to die. When Alexander finally reached the wagon, he found the king of Persia alone, breathing his last breaths in the dust. Seeing his great rival brought so low, Alexander was moved with pity and respect. He covered Darius's body with his own cloak, a gesture honoring the fallen king. He then gave Darius a royal funeral and vowed to hunt down Bessus not as a conqueror, but as the avenger of a murdered king, cementing his claim as the legitimate successor to the Persian throne. In the remote wild lands of Sogdia, Alexander's conquest faced a unique challenge. A large force of rebels led by the nobleman Oxyates had taken refuge atop the Sogdian rock, a fortress so naturally formidable it was considered impregnable. Well-stocked and accessible by only a single narrow path, they believed they could outlast any siege. When Alexander sent a herald to demand their surrender, the defenders laughed. They arrogantly shouted back that if he wanted their rock, he would need to find soldiers with wings to fly to the top. This mockery was a direct challenge to Alexander's pride and ingenuity. Alexander's response was immediate. He offered immense rewards to the first men who could reach the summit. He gathered 300 volunteers with experience in rock climbing. Under the cover of a freezing night, they began their impossible ascent, using tent pegs for pitons and flaxen lines for ropes. The climb was a nightmare. 30 men fell to their deaths in the darkness, but the rest pushed onward, driven by their king's promise and their own indomitable will. At dawn, the Sogdians awoke to a terrifying sight. Macedonian soldiers were standing on the peak above them. Alexander triumphantly pointed out his winged soldiers to the stunned defenders below. Their morale shattered instantly. Believing the impossible had happened and the entire army was upon them, they surrendered. The unconquerable rock had been conquered, not by a legion, but by the sheer audacity of a few hundred men and the will of their king. After the stunning capture of the Sogdian rock, the families of the rebel leaders were brought before Alexander as captives. Inside a lavish tent, the conqueror inspected the prisoners taken from the formidable fortress in 327 BC. His eyes fell upon one woman, Roxana, the daughter of the defeated nobleman Oxyates. She met his gaze not with fear but with proud defiance. Ancient historians record that she was a woman of extraordinary beauty, and that Alexander fell in love with her the moment he saw her. But this was far more than a simple romance. It was a calculated political statement. Alexander's decision to marry a Sogdian captive was deeply unpopular with his Macedonian veterans. Gathered in a council, senior generals like Craterus and Ptolemy appeared concerned, arguing against the match. They wanted him to marry a Greek noble, not a barbarian. They saw it as a betrayal of their customs and a sign of his growing Orientalism. Alexander, however, remained resolute, dismissing their concerns and choosing a different path. Alexander saw the bigger picture. The fierce guerrilla war raging across the brutal landscapes of Sogdia and Bactria was costly. By marrying the daughter of a powerful local lord, he was signaling that he was not just a conqueror, but a unifier. This alliance with the local nobility was crucial to pacifying the region. His marriage brought an end to the fighting, as Oxyates embraced his new son-in-law, symbolizing the forging of a new, blended Greco-Persian empire. The wedding was performed according to local custom in a mountain fortress. Alexander in Greek attire and Roxana in stunning Sogdian dress stood together. The ceremony was simple but profound. Alexander drew his sword not for war but for union and sliced a single loaf of bread. He and Roxana each took a piece and ate it, sealing their vows. This act symbolized their new life together, a union of two cultures. The love-struck king and the captive princess were now bound, and through them, so too were Europe and Asia, in a way the world had never seen before. Having conquered the vast Persian Empire, Alexander the Great pushed his armies further east, into the unknown lands of India. But in 326 BC, at the banks of the Hydaspes River, he met his most formidable opponent yet, King Porus of the Pauravas. An army of immense size, backed by a terrifying corps of 200 war elephants, blocked his path across the monsoon-swollen river. For days, Alexander feinted and maneuvered along the riverbank, deliberately confusing the Indian king about his true intentions. Then, in an act of supreme audacity, he led a hand-picked strike force on a perilous 17-mile march upstream. Using the noise of a powerful thunderstorm to mask his movements, he crossed the raging river on makeshift rafts and animal hides. He had put the river between his small force and the main army, risking everything on a single, decisive battle. The battle that followed was Alexander's costliest and most brutal. On the muddy ground, the Macedonian infantry faced the horror of a massed elephant charge for the first time. The war elephants smashed into their disciplined lines, creating carnage as they tossed soldiers with their trunks and trampled them underfoot. But the veteran phalanx held its ground, stabbing at the animals' feet and legs with their long pikes. Alexander's genius was in his rapid adaptation to this new form of warfare. He ordered his light infantry and archers to target the mahouts, the drivers controlling the great beasts. Wounded and terrified without their guides, the elephants became an uncontrollable force. They turned back on Porus's own lines, spreading confusion and death. The hunters had become the hunted. The battle was won, but at a great cost. King Porus, a giant of a man who fought with incredible bravery until he was covered in 9 wounds, was finally captured. When Alexander asked his defeated foe how he should be treated, Porus gave his legendary reply, "Treat me, Alexander, as a king." Deeply impressed by his courage, Alexander not only restored Porus to his throne, but also granted him more territory, turning a valiant enemy into a loyal ally. After the bloody victory at the Hydaspes, Alexander's army reached the Hyphasis River, the last of the 5 rivers of the Punjab. They had marched for 8 years, covering thousands of miles. But here at the supposed edge of the world, the greatest army on earth finally broke. Alexander wanted to push on, to conquer the lands of the Ganges, where rumors spoke of even greater empires and mightier armies. He tried to inspire his men with promises of wealth and immortal glory. But his words fell on deaf ears. The men were done. They were homesick. Their bodies were scarred and their spirits were drowned by the relentless monsoon rains. It was the veteran General Conus who dared to speak for the army. He reminded Alexander of their loyalty and their sacrifices, but spoke of their profound exhaustion. He pleaded with the king to know when to stop, to lead them home so they could enjoy the fruits of their incredible victories. For the first time, a general had openly defied Alexander's will. Enraged and humiliated, Alexander shut himself in his tent for 3 days, hoping his men would relent. But they did not. The silence of the army was more powerful than any weapon. The divine king, the undefeated conqueror, had finally reached the one border he could not cross, the limit of human endurance. On the 3rd day, Alexander conceded. He declared that they would turn back. The camp erupted in joyous celebration. The mutiny was over. To mark the limit of his advance, he ordered the construction of 12 massive altars dedicated to the Olympian gods. His dream of conquering the world was over, and the long journey home had begun. In 324 BC, after his harrowing campaigns in India, Alexander the Great returned to the opulent Persian city of Susa. He was no longer just a conqueror, but the master of a vast empire stretching from Greece to the Indus. His new challenge was not conquest but governance. To rule this sprawling domain, he embarked on a policy of fusion, a deliberate attempt to unite the ruling classes of Macedonia and Persia into a single cohesive elite, much to the unease of his Macedonian veterans. The ultimate expression of this policy was a spectacular event, the Susa weddings. In a massive, custom-built hall filled with 92 golden bridal couches, Alexander staged a mass marriage ceremony on an unheard-of scale. Over 5 days, he himself married Statira II, the eldest daughter of his defeated rival, King Darius III, symbolically uniting the old and new royal houses. Following his lead, 80 of his most senior companions and generals were also wed to the daughters of prominent Persian nobles. But the event did not stop with the high command. The scene expanded as Alexander arranged and paid for the marriages of over 10,000 of his soldiers to local women. Each man who took a Persian wife received a handsome dowry directly from the king's treasury. It was a state-sponsored project of cultural assimilation, a grand social experiment intended to create a generation of Greco-Persian children who would be the bedrock of his new empire. While the scale was magnificent, the policy was deeply unpopular with many Macedonians. They viewed the Persian customs and the forced unions as a betrayal of their heritage, feeling Alexander was imposing barbarian ways upon them. For them, it was less a celebration and more a political command. Though most of these unions would be dissolved after Alexander's sudden death a year later, the Susa weddings remain a stunning example of his audacious and perhaps flawed vision to merge East and West into a single world. Hephaestion was more than Alexander's most trusted general. He was his childhood friend, his confidant, his other half. It was said Alexander was one soul dwelling in 2 bodies. But in the autumn of 324 BC, in the city of Ecbatana, this lifelong bond would be violently severed. While Alexander was occupied with athletic games, Hephaestion fell ill with a fever. After a week he seemed to be recovering, but then suffered a sudden relapse and died. Alexander's arrival came only moments after his friend had passed. The conqueror of the world was too late. The grief that followed was terrifying in its intensity. Alexander lay with his friend's body inconsolable. He had the attending physician crucified. In an unprecedented decree, he ordered public mourning across the entire Persian Empire, a tribute usually reserved for the death of the great king himself. He was not just mourning a friend, he was mourning a part of himself. Alexander sent envoys to the oracle of Siwa, demanding that Hephaestion be declared a god. The oracle compromised, granting him the status of a divine hero. Alexander then began planning a funeral pyre in Babylon, of such magnificence it begged belief, costing a fortune. But he would not live to see it completed. 8 months later, Alexander himself was dead, his own will seemingly extinguished by the loss of his dearest friend. In the spring of 323 BC, Alexander the Great, ruler of the known world, was in Babylon, planning his next campaign. Still reeling from the death of his companion Hephaestion, the unconquerable king was about to meet an enemy he could not defeat. After a long banquet and a bout of heavy drinking, Alexander fell ill with a fever. It was no ordinary sickness. For 12 agonizing days it consumed him, leaving him unable to speak, then unable to move. The greatest commander in history was rendered helpless. His army, hearing their king was dying, demanded to see him one last time. In a profoundly moving procession, the men who had conquered the world for him marched past their leader's deathbed. Unable to speak, Alexander could only offer a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a silent farewell to his loyal soldiers. As the end neared, his generals desperately asked for a successor. With his final breath, Alexander is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." On June 10, 323 BC, Alexander the Great died. He left behind a legacy of conquest that changed the world, but no heir to hold it together. His final words became a prophecy, unleashing 50 years of war as his generals tore his empire apart.